South Africa, the state-owned power utility Eskom says it is investigating if an attempt was made to poison its outgoing CEO, Andre de Ruyter. The Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan further adds that anyone found responsible will be charged. This comes after de Ruyter resigned in December after failing to solve a crisis in Eskom that has led to a record number of power cuts in the country. After taking office in January 2020, de Ruyter led a company-wide crackdown on corruption and organised criminal behaviour, including sabotage of infrastructure at various Eskom power plants. His last day in office, as things currently stand, will be the 31st of March 2023. Let's dive into a bit of analysis on this particular story. Sanusha Naidu joins us now from Cape Town with more data here. So, Sanusha, do we know anything at all about this alleged poisoning incident that we understand took place in the middle of December?
Good day to you, and season's greetings to you and the viewers. We just don't know too much. I think at this point it's being investigated by the security cluster and the police. What we do know is that Mr. de Ruyter had actually confirmed that he was being poisoned at his head offices in Johannesburg, where the Eskom headquarters are based. And of course, he indicated that it was basically in his coffee. So at this point in time, we're not certain in terms of where the situation is. Have they actually got the empirical evidence? What kind of case has been lodged with the police? But we're also not clear in terms of who is actually behind this alleged poisoning. So I think at this point in time, it's still very much an investigative inquiry. And once more information is then released to the public, and in terms of the case itself, the criminal case itself, we'll have a better understanding of the situation and the circumstances around what Mr. de Ruyter has actually allowed given as a media report in terms of his alleged, in terms of the poisoning.
Indeed. So mid-December also had another interesting incident in it. The government deployed units from the military, the South African National Defence Force, at some power stations as part of efforts to deal with wide-ranging sabotage of public infrastructure. But just for context for our viewers who are not in South Africa, can you walk us through how endemic this sabotage problem is and why it's proven to be so intractable to solve?
Well, you know, the problem or the challenge or the dilemma is that these are key points in terms of the grid, the national electricity grid, and these are power stations that essentially have been either vandalized, and of course sabotage can actually mean anything in the broader definition. So what has happened is that these are areas where people, or some of the so-called vandalism that has taken place has actually been used to try and take away the copper cables that actually run around this area with regard to these power stations. But they've also found 2 Eskom employees that were essentially involved in some kind of vandalism of the power stations as well. So the reason why they've become a critical point in terms of deploying the defense force during the elective conference of the ruling party, the African National Congress, was to also ensure that the situation did not become out of control. Now, the sabotage argument has been in the public domain for a long time. I think when the army was deployed in mid-December, Mr. de Ruyter, who's now resigned and will stay on until the 31st of March, had indicated that this should have been an earlier intervention by the state authorities. Now, the problem we have is that it seems to me that it's one element of it is criminality, vandalism, etc. The other element of it is actually to sabotage the actual Eskom grid, in a sense where it's some political analysts and some commentators are arguing that it is a political approach in terms of destabilizing the country. So I think at this point in time, we're sitting in a very kind of curious, if not delicate situation when it comes to the electricity grid. But we do know that there's also aging infrastructure that also causes the electricity blackout to happen and load shedding to take place. So there's a multiple
I'm deviating slightly here, but it's not just the power stations that have been affected, because this also affects the metro network and the train network as well. There's been a lot of theft of copper cabling, of some of the steel pylons as well, that essentially these train tracks, or rather these trains run on. And that still, again, it's been something that's been running for years now.
but you can't, but of course you can't, I mean, as much as you want to say that it's interrelated, and I agree with you that there is a sense of overwhelming criminality when it comes to the copper cable theft, and the trains and when they are running. And of course, the fact of the matter is that a lot of these railway lines and railway infrastructure is derelict as well, and they age in terms of their capability and capacity. You have to also look at the fact that Eskom is the power station. And of course, there's a set of issues there that are basically underpinning Eskom's weakness. And then, of course, the copper cabling theft is something that has to deal with in terms of what we are dealing with, a general level of copper cable theft that's happening countrywide. And also there's illegal connections, and these illegal connections also create an undue amount of pressure on the national grid. So there's a multiple set of factors here that we have to think about in terms of what is weakening the electricity grid, in addition to the fact that a lot of the aging infrastructure has a maintenance crisis as well.
Indeed, when the president was talking about, or he was describing rather, the Eskom CEO job as a difficult one, I think he was slightly underselling it there. Is a plan to take over Eskom's near, I believe it's almost 400 billion rand of debt, to move part of that onto the public balance sheet? Is that still on course, and how exactly would it work?
Well, from the last interaction that we've seen in terms of the announcement that was made in the medium-term expenditure budget statement made by the minister in November last year, that's still the plan, to take on that debt. Now, the debt is actually going to be quite a major debt for government to take on, given its critical finances, the fact that it's taken on its current budget deficit is increasing. The economy is not performing in the way that it should, despite what your business report said about certain companies and how they've moved the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in terms of their performance in early of the day. But I think what's challenging for the government is when it takes on the sovereign debt, it becomes the sole creditor responsible for this debt. And that's going to be a key issue in terms of how they're going to manage this debt and how it's going to actually impact on the fiscus of the country. And I think that in itself has also been a warning sign from National Treasury in saying that when they take on this debt, it's going to be critical to understand how creditors are going to deal with Eskom's debt and how government is going to manage this. So it's also going to be a burden, I think. And to quite rightly point out in terms of what you are saying, is that it's going to create an undue amount of pressure in terms of our debt sovereignty, but also in terms of how we manage the debt in terms of the fiscus. Because already the fiscus is under pressure due to higher wages, due to uncertainty in the markets, not enough investment coming in. And of course, the cost of living has increased substantially, despite what we may have seen certain levels of reduction in in the fuel price, etc., last week. But that doesn't really mean that cost of inflation has come down. So we're going to have a kind of interesting dynamic going forward when the Monetary Policy Committee meets of the Reserve Bank, the central bank, in the first quarter of this year. And that's going to be a question of whether we're going to see more interest rate hikes.
Indeed. We'll see how this plays out. Anusha Naidu, thank you very much.